Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Hopi Survival Kit, The Prophecies, Instructions, and Warnings Revealed by the Last Elders, by Thomas E. Males, narrated by Kaipo Schwab. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to illustrations and sketches present in the print and e-book formats of this book. Chapter 1. The Secret of Land and Life. Tekwa Ikachi is the creed of the Hopi traditionalists. In its English translation, what it means is blending with the land and celebrating life. The traditionalists' aim has always been to achieve this for themselves and everyone else in the world. About A.D. 1100, the way to accomplish it was given to them by Masao, the awesome guardian of the earth. For the next 750 years, the people blended and celebrated, living in peace and happiness through a Spanish intrusion that lasted for 140 years, through constant depredations by Apaches and Navajos, and through most of the normal problems human beings face in life. With this impressive reputation, the Hopi are broadly known today as the peaceful people, and outsiders, living in a world beset with turmoil, have often wondered how they achieved it. It was only as this present century began that the Hopi situation changed. As the white government steadfastly turned the people away from Masao's teachings, peace and happiness was turned away with it, and doing what was necessary to achieve the Hopi aim for the rest of the world was frustrated as well. We find that human acts and choices have a powerful effect on the direction, pace, and intensity of what happens on the grand stage of life. They also affect the timing. Even little-noticed things can do this. In testimony to this truth, the following incident in Hopi history is one of several that has delayed by nearly a century the delivery of an urgent secret of survival to a world that has been recklessly endangering itself. In the year 1921, gentle, stoic Ukiuma, chief of the Hopi village of Hotevilla, was in prison for the 8th time in 14 years. Sometimes he was locked up in cells with murderers, robbers, and child molesters, individuals who had committed the most appalling crimes in America. He even spent a year on infamous Alcatraz Island. His offense in each instance was his refusal to sign a United States government paper, giving it permission to remove village children from their homes and educate them in distant boarding schools. All Hotevilla village fathers rejected the demand and were similarly imprisoned. Only old people, mothers, and a few older children were left behind to continue as best they could. There were no trials concerning these actions and consequences. Parents were not asked why they objected. Justice was simple and direct. Over a period of years, Hotevilla fathers were at intervals herded 40 miles to the agency jail in Keams Canyon, where they were chained in pairs and then sent out to work on reservation roads in the hottest and the coldest weather. Burdened in this way, they labored with picks, hammers, and explosives. At night they were chained in groups of 6 so that, if one had to go to the bathroom, the others had to come with him. Soap was mixed into their food to make them sick. All they needed to do to end their misery was to sign a copy of that paper. Each time they were freed and returned home, they were arrested again and imprisoned. It was a vicious process that went on for more than 2 decades. Why the Hotevilla men never gave in is both a miracle and a question demanding an answer. Since U.S. soldiers and Navajo policemen took the children by armed force anyway, nothing justified the imprisonments. But what the United States government really wanted was to break the last of the Hopi spirit and resistance to conversion. From the year 1906, Hotevilla was at the top of the administration's most wanted list, and its steadfastness and refusal was an embarrassment to the government. Long before this day in 1921, the other Hopi villages had capitulated. Even the mother village, Oraibi, had lowered its flag. Only Hotevilla stood firm, and Ukiuma was its backbone. Vengeful school principals lashed out by entering Hotevilla homes uninvited, verbally abusing parents, smashing pottery used for cooking and eating, and cutting blankets needed for winter warmth into shreds. They made surprise winter raids so fleeing children could be tracked in the snow. Even though Hopi children received no physical discipline at home, the white teachers whipped the children in class whenever they felt an example needed to be set. When schools were placed near a village, even little and poorly clothed children were forced to walk to classes in midwinter across rocky mesa terrain that was covered with snow and ice. Ukiuma was a little man. Like most Hopi people in those days, he stood no taller than 5 feet and weighed at most 90 pounds. He was never a physical threat and, except for hunting, never carried a weapon. Mahogany-skinned, naked except for a breech clout, and looking half-starved, he sat this day in the government agent's swivel chair, his knees doubled under his chin and his skinny arms folded around them. His position was like that of a child in its mother's womb, and it was symbolic, since as an adult he lived, heart and soul, in the womb of Mother Earth. Only 3 years before, the United States and its European allies had won a great war against Germany. It was one in which Hopi men, even though they could not vote, were forced to fight. Ukiuma thought about that while he smiled pleasantly at 2 white men, an army colonel named Scott and the agency superintendent named Crane, who stood to one side and talked about him. Any traditionalist who knew the Hopi prophecies could have told them years before that the Great War was coming, and even who it would be fought against. Their ancestors learned about the earth-shaking engagement from Masao 800 years before it started, and handed down from generation to generation an astonishing amount of even more important information having to do with the Hopis and the world. They were ready to tell all of these things to the first whites to come to Hopi country in the 1800s, but when they experienced how the whites behaved toward them, they decided against it. In consequence, information that was not intended to be a secret became one. The agent made reference to the wrinkled and stained sheet of paper he held in one hand, extending it toward Ukiuma. But the chief shook his head and turned away. While he did not understand their English words, he knew what they were saying about him. Translators had told him that his captors thought he was a filthy, dried-up chimpanzee and a mild lunatic who would rather wear a G-string than accept the comforts of modern life. Since whoever got Ukiuma to sign that paper would have a feather in his cap, the government employees kept trying. But his inflexibility, and that of his usually gentle followers, was frustrating, and it comforted the officials little to know that even when the chief was taken a decade before to Washington, D.C., he was not persuaded in the slightest. White missionaries had sought again and again to sway him and accomplish nothing. How, the 2 men wondered aloud now, had this little spider developed such an impenetrable shell, and why, in 14 years of trying, had no one been able to crack it? Part of their problem lay in the fact that they let what they saw affect their judgment. They believed that no people who lived as simply and poorly as the Hopi could possibly offer anything worthwhile to the burgeoning outside world, let alone a message of greatest magnitude. In particular, they asked themselves, how could a dirty, unkempt, unschooled beggar, the leader of a pacifist people who had accomplished nothing of significance, know anything that was vital to world survival? It was plain to these officials that the only hope the Hopi had was to learn to live as whites. So they had not come to the chief or to any Hopi to listen, and as a result, they failed to learn the secret of living in peace. They never discovered that Ukiuma's ancestors had made a solemn vow that they would always follow the pattern of life their Creator had given them. And they never discovered that included in the vow was the promise that, when certain warning signs indicated that the close of the 4th cycle of the world had begun, the Hopis would pass on specific warnings and a way of survival. But again, for whites, the idea that such information could come from the Hopis was an impossibility. The Creator would never choose such a primitive people for so vital a role in history. Understandably, then, when highly educated white anthropologists forced their way into the Hopi worship chambers at the turn of the century, it was to photograph and write about their enchanting, primitive rituals. They were certain that, In capturing these picturesque and esoteric ceremonies, they were recording the only thing that was really important about the Hopis. When the natives saw that the intruders' minds were closed to anything else, they withheld information of utmost value to the earth and its inhabitants. Silence became the standard response to any questions about Hopi understandings. Here in the agency jail 2 decades later, we see the response in operation again, as the scorn of whites for Hopi understandings and ways continues. Ukiuma concludes that, like the scientists, the colonel and the agent do not deserve to hear the secret of blending with the land and celebrating life. He intuitively knows the time still has not come to tell the outside world what it desperately needs to know. The scrawny chief did hint at it one day when he said to the agent, "You see, I am doing this as much for you as for my own people. Suppose I should not protest your orders. Suppose I should willingly accept the ways of the Bahanas. Immediately the great snake would turn over, and the sea would rush in, and we would all be drowned. You too. I am therefore protecting you." But the agent made no attempt to understand. He was too well educated to believe in awesome floods and giant snakes, and recognizing this, Ukiuma did not pursue the matter. So this quiet day in history ended, and time moved on. A second world war that was also predicted came and went. In truth, prophecies of all kinds were being fulfilled regularly, and the traditionalist Hopis knew it. Even seeing that the countries of the world were moving ever deeper into trouble didn't move them to reveal what they knew. They kept the greater part of their secret to themselves. After Ukiuma died, his son, Dan Kachongva, wrote a little book in 1972 that outlined some of the principal thoughts of the secret, but that was all. Writers Frank Waters and Misha Titiev gathered small bits of information about the secret during their years with the Hopis. After they wrote what they knew about it, it was a tantalizing mystery known to exist, but whose details were still hidden. Hopi delegations went 4 times to the United Nations headquarters in New York City, where they tried without success to tell the secret to its members. Over an 11-year period, 5 of the elder traditionalists wrote a newsletter to warn other Hopis about the consequences of abandoning the secret. But so many of the people had embraced white beliefs and ways that the effort fell on deaf ears. The tribal council controlled the schools, money, and the jobs now, and that was all that mattered. 75 years of silence flowed slowly by like a meandering river. One by one, the keepers of the secret left this world, taking what they knew about the secret with them, and went to live with the Kachina spirits. Meanwhile, the more fortunate areas of the outside world prospered richly, but at the cost of mistakes, the consequences of which accumulated in time to the point of threatening its very life. In reaction to this, some people in the outside world began to look and to work for solutions. They also became listeners. The Creator and Masao observed this and set certain wheels in motion at Hopi land. Then one day in May 1993, I answered an invitation to come to the remote Hopi reservation and meet the man who would turn out to be the last remaining keeper of the secret, the only person still alive who knew everything about it and was able to pass it on. 100 years old at the time, he was so like Ukiuma in size and attitude it was amazing, and the second day after we met, he chose to give me the secret to give to you. On hearing it, I knew immediately that it stands with the most important revelations ever given by the Creator, for, among other things, it tells us why certain events are happening in the world today, what is coming soon, and how we can influence and survive it. This secret includes awesome prophecies, sublime instructions, and dire warnings that together make up a unique survival kit. In the midst of what is happening now and is certain to occur in the near future, it can enrich and save your life, rescue the earth, and is quite probably the only thing that can deliver the world from extinction. Hopi land, situated in the northeastern corner of Arizona, is so old and so infused with spiritual life that it is hallowed ground. It is bathed in an aura of the sacred and carries with it an ever-present possibility of the unexpected. Visiting there does strange things to your senses, and the minute you cross the reservation border, something unusual begins to happen to you. It is as though you have moved into a different time frame and are in touch with a myriad of new senses and deities. As my friend Catherine Cheshire and I traveled toward it from Flagstaff, Arizona, in her 4x4 truck on an afternoon in May 1993, my mind was a jumble of thoughts, most of which appeared to me at that time to have little to do with the Hopis. I knew nothing about Ukiuma and nothing of consequence about the secret. Most of my meandering thoughts were what most people would, had they been there to hear them, believed to be far-fetched. Among other things, I reflected on the fact that in numerous countries, the world is in its most serious trouble ever today. Facing this global emergency is a first priority for everyone, and without asking myself why I should even have any such ideas at this particular time, I found myself wondering whether my visit to this ancient, remote, and honored place might have anything to do with that. Before long, the first of the flat-topped red and brown mesas that identify the reservation area began to loom in the distance, and overhead in the deep blue sky, a few white clouds followed us, as though there were Hopi kachinas in them who were watching us. The highway was flat, the asphalt paving was in good condition, and the curves were broad. The truck did not sway, yet I shifted around in my seat like an anxious child and clung tightly to the padded handle bolted to the roof. I sensed that I was on the verge of something important, yet hadn't the remotest idea what it was or why I should even think about it. A half-hour later, we rounded a bend and headed northwest, not going far before Catherine slowed the truck down. I noted that we were just across from the place where the village of Kikotsmovi's main street meets the highway. As she deftly turned the truck off of the highway and in the opposite direction, I looked back at the village. Except for the somewhat imposing box-like and rust-colored tribal headquarters building, Kikotsmovi was in no way impressive. Judging by its architecture, you would never know that Hopis even lived there. As we bumped along at 5 miles an hour, over as rough and jarring a dirt road as anyone is ever going to experience, I found myself wondering again whether or not the invitation was a coincidence or fated. I have mixed feelings about such things as fate, but in light of all that has happened since that time, I see nothing accidental in it, including the timing. If the trip had waited until now, none of the things that have been accomplished since then could have been done. And the future of the world would have been for you and me a far worse one than it will be. Come and help us. Manuel Hoyangawa's letter had pleaded as a follow-up to 2 lengthy telephone conversations. Help these particular Hopis with what? I found myself asking. What could I do for them that they couldn't do for themselves? If there were serious problems, I hadn't learned anything about them during the time when, 10 years earlier, I had visited the reservation on numerous occasions while I was researching what became my 2-volume series on the Pueblo Indians. The dangers of being only an outside observer can be seen here. The festering problems and searing divisions at Hopi escaped me entirely. More importantly, I did not learn anything at all about the sacred covenant and the critical need to proclaim its message to the world. This time, though, the situation would be different. I would be visiting Covenant Land itself, the western end of the reservation where Hopis live on the third of 3 mesas that contain the 12 Hopi villages. Here, out in the quiet farming lands of the village, and under a pale summer moon, I would on this very night meet the man who above all I had come to see. Although he is an exceptional individual, he's much too humble to think of himself in this way. Since most of you will probably never meet in person an ancient gladiator whose only armor is that of Masao, and whose only weapon is peace, I want to describe this one to you. His name is Dan Evahima. Born in Old Oraibi in 1893, he has a deeply etched and mahogany-colored face that is topped by a thick and unruly mane of silver-colored hair. He stands amazingly straight and, as a result of a century of hard work, squares his broad shoulders like a marine standing at attention. But he speaks of himself and other elderly elders as gnarled old roots. In appearance and toughness he surely is that. Yet he is a root filled with remarkable energy for his venerable age, having a quick mind, a ready smile, and dark eyes that sparkle whenever he laughs, which is often. Like the Hopis of old, Dan Evahima is a peaceful and a happy man, qualities which defy the fact that he has been honed by adversity. His entire life has been plagued by unfair intrusions of the worst possible kind. I was astounded to learn that he still works in his fields every day, either alone or side by side with white friends and Hopi relatives who plant, cultivate, and harvest corn and other crops. He is also a well-known medicine person and healer, and when he's not farming or healing, he is actively engaged at Hotevilla village with the other members of his Roadrunner and Greasewood clans in ceremonial or political activities. In these, he is always a leader, and undoubtedly the most knowledgeable man present, an irreplaceable repository of ancient lore. This much is certain. However he has lived and whatever he has practiced over the past 100 years has sustained him in Fountain of Youth fashion remarkably well, and it is worth looking into. I do that under the heading, The Ark's Instructions, and what we learn there has everything to do with survival. Dan is cared for by his sister's daughter, Susie Lamatska, who is herself an exceptional person, a wonderful carver of Kachina dolls, and among the staunchest of the younger traditionalists. Dan lives on his ancestral property with Susie, her 2 children, and her Navajo husband, just 6 or so miles, a trip made infinitely longer by the roughness of the road from Kikotsmovi. Their flat-roofed house is small by most outside world standards. It is a patched-together building made in its oldest part of mortared sandstones. In its youngest part, it consists of plywood, tar paper, and any other material that has been conveniently at hand. None of it is painted, and none is finished off. Except for a propane stove and a gasoline-driven generator that provides small amounts of electricity for short periods of time, there are none of the conveniences the modern world takes for granted. No running water, no lights except in the kitchen, no air conditioning, and no indoor plumbing facilities. No one in the family has their own bedroom. Winter heat comes from a single pot-bellied stove located in the living room. The furniture has seen better days, and the upholstered pieces are covered by blankets. Despite the limitations, everyone is happy at Dan's home, and it is a warm place to visit. Many people do, both Hopis and outsiders. Whatever food is available is freely shared, and there is seldom a time when someone has not come from near or far to visit with Dan and Susie. If there are no guests present, Dan goes out alone in the late afternoon to pray to Masao, asking him to watch over the family through the night. In the chapters ahead, you will learn who exactly this important deity is and how he goes about this watching. If the generator has fuel, Dan and the family might watch a little television to see what is going on in the world. Otherwise, he goes to bed shortly after sundown. He is up at sunrise and goes out to pray to the Creator to guide him through the day. He does this at the foot of the mesa, where Evahima family members have prayed for generations. Then he has breakfast. Dan has an excellent appetite that is kindled by Susie's expertly cooked food. Susie has a robust son, whose craving for food is as ravenous as that of most growing boys. While we were eating one morning, I noticed that he had his eye on several links of sausage that still sat on a plate that was in the middle of the table, but he wanted to be polite and bided his time before making his move. When he did, he was chagrined to find that Dan had already wolfed them down. Dan's farming fields are across the road from the house and readily accessible. He can walk to them in a few minutes. They lie in a broad and flat wash that collects the rainwater as it comes rushing down from the plateau above. The rich and fertile sandy soil, so fine a handful of it feels like silk, absorbs the water like a sponge. Once the corn has been planted, the moisture that has already settled in the wash gives it its first boost toward the surface. There's a separate ranch extension where livestock is raised. courtesy of the Peabody coal mine, which is exhausting the underground water as it uses it to transport the coal to a processing plant in Nevada. The watering basin has gone dry, and with hand watering, the only alternative, this part of Dan's work has diminished considerably. Except for moderate dress clothing and a limited amount of silver jewelry donned on festive days, he wears the plain work outfits of ranch hands or farmers everywhere. Checkered woolen shirts with long sleeves, belted Levi pants with rolled-up cuffs, and heavy work shoes. Now and then he uses a colorful bandana or a cap to hold his hair in place. In the winter, he adds a hip-length black woolen coat with a rolled collar and a knitted wool hat. For a century, Dan has lived off this land and been self-sufficient. Money is of little consequence to him. If any comes his way, he uses it to purchase things that, because of reservation changes, he's no longer able to produce. Most of it goes to the family. Until we began our work together, he had never possessed more than $100 at any given time. That was a gift some white person had given him years ago in return for information about Hopi farming practices. As you would expect, there have been other outstanding male Hopis among the elderly elders, but all except one of these have put on the cloud mask and gone to live with the Kachina spirits. I introduce you to some of the most notable in Chapter 5. Through long years of personal experience, each of them, along with some traditionalist Hopi women, became an eloquent keeper and source of information about traditionalist Hopi feelings and history. To say what I do about Dan is one thing. To be with him is another. For he has an aura of profound spirituality about him, and when his eyes capture yours, they look so deeply into you that you feel nothing is hidden from him. When in the 1970s I was with my friend Fool's Crow, the last ceremonial chief of the Teton Sioux, and at Pine Ridge, South Dakota, wrote the story of his remarkable life, I thought I would never again meet a Native American equal to him. But Dan Iwahima is. He and Fool's Crow have to be counted among the greatest of the Native American leaders to live during this 20th century. Although Fool's Crow died in 1989, he is steadily gaining this reputation both at home and in the outside world. Dan is not looking for honors, but his will nevertheless come in due time. I just want you to have the sense of him before we move on, and to be able to see him in your mind's eye when you reflect on the material that follows. Catherine and I met late that evening with Dan, Susie, and 2 other Hopi men Dan had invited. It was a smaller group than I expected, but I learned later that Dan wanted the meeting to be private. One of these men was Manuel Hoyongoa. The other one, whom I will not name, was, to my surprise, overbearing and dominated the conversation from the minute we started. Most of all, he made it painfully clear that he considered himself to be the spokesman for the traditionalists, and that any outsider who helped them would be of his choosing and subject to his authority. Since I was not one of these, he concluded that this meeting would be the end of it. I was puzzled, because I had read about his efforts on behalf of the traditionalists and assumed he was as concerned about the situation as anyone. When he finished, and the others said nothing, Catherine and Susie were plainly upset, and I concluded that I had wasted my time coming. So I said very little in reply, and resolved that I would return to California the next day. By then, and in spite of my wondering about so many things on the way in, I was in a who needs them mood, and ready to bail out. Dan was quiet also, and seemed to be dozing much of the time. That didn't help me either. But once the 2 men had left, and before we parted company, Dan roused himself, laid his hand on my arm in a comforting way, and said in a very friendly manner that he would talk with me in the morning. Encouraged by that promise, I had a good night's sleep in the trailer home Catherine keeps on his property. I was up early. The air was crisp and there was no wind. It was one of those clear and sparkling days that are so typical of the high mesa country. As I walked around the property, the rich smell of sage, juniper, and cedar hung on my shoulders like a heavy and pungent cloak. I was followed by 2 short-haired mongrel dogs, one black and one brown, who were decidedly curious as to who I was. I ignored their sniffing as best I could, while I paused to look at the ruins of ancient stone houses on the mesa side and top above.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?